I mean, there is an argument that the Black people who seem to reach the highest echelons of power, like Kamala and Obama, are not African American per se, but are African descent or West Indian descent or married to someone outside of the race. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm very familiar with that argument.
What do you make of that argument? You think there's any legitimacy to it?
I think the people who subscribe to that argument believe there's legitimacy because they're literally talking about like president and vice president. They're talking literally about two people. So
the two Black people to reach the top of the echelon in the United States happen to be two people who are not direct descendants of American slaves.
I think first and foremost, there have been several people that are descendants of American slaves who were qualified for those positions.
Correct.
And for one reason or another, have not gotten to that point. But we have had plenty of congressional representatives and senators and whatnot that are descendants of African slaves, of American slaves.
But they ain't president.
Not president yet. I'm more worried about getting any person of color to that will, be president once again, because with the way these white people are acting, they're like, yeah, you're not getting another one of these motherfuckers for a century with the way these folks are acting,
Right.
So it's one of these like wait and see for 100 years types of things. I would love to see that happen. But I do know that, like, yes, the Dr. Umars out there are definitely going to point to that. My thing is, it's almost like kind of the inverse of like diaspora wars. And so I don't see the point in pointing that out as much, but it is something interesting to think about.
Well, I think the argument that people like Dr. Umar and probably Dr. Boyce Watkins are pointing out when they are having conversations with other people who share similar ideas is that when we're fighting for rights in a particular marginalized group, you have to fight that fight on multiple fronts. And one of those fronts is economic. And I think one of the arguments that they have brought to the table more than once is, where is your money invested? Your money's invested in the areas that provide for your family. And so if your family is Black or of color or Asian or Persian or Jewish or whatever, you may spend more time at a Jewish market or an Asian market, or your money and resources is going to go back into your community. But when you're in an interracial partnership, and if that partner happens to be white, then your money is most likely going to go into the areas that white people spend their money in, which is in other white areas. And then how does that move the marginalized group forward economically when your resources are being invested elsewhere?
That theory also assumes that Black people all live around other Black people, which used to be the case.
Or shop around other Black people.
Yeah, and shop around other Black people. And that used to be the case. But now with mobile and digital and everything internet, I don't have to live around other Black people to spend money with Black people. I can find Black-owned businesses and spend money. I can find Black nonprofits and donate. I can find Black students that I want to specifically help them with their
And you can do it online.
I can do all of that online. I can live in Canada. I can live in Mexico. I can live in France. True. I don't care. You know what I mean?
True.
And there's specific apps that will literally help you find Black-owned businesses.
Yes.
You're shopping for X thing. Here are the Black-owned businesses that have you do that. You know what I mean? I believe somebody's also recently launched something that literally on Amazon, you can find Black-owned Amazon sellers for shit.
Right.
But if we're talking 1950s, I get it. And I'm familiar with, Jarvis's whole thing where, the idea that back when we were more insular, the Black dollar was circulated.
Went further. It circulated across more Black people than it does now after integrating, which was, again, economics, right? That was one of the strongest arguments when we were at Berkeley from more conservative Blacks that we came across or worked with that were of the ideology that interracial marriage is wrong for Black people, at least, and that circulating the dollar in the Black community and keeping it there was one of the priorities to, Black excellence and Black success. And not to say that there's not some truth to that, you know what I mean? But we've never won this fight alone. During the civil rights movement, it wasn't when we were getting eaten by dogs and beaten by the police and tortured and disappearing and being murdered. It was when the Allies started getting eaten by dogs and beaten by police and murdered.
Yeah, those 4 Jewish guys that got killed when they just came down to the South to help.
Right. I mean, and we've heard about that case, right? In every class from Here to Kingdom Come, you've heard about those guys. There's thousands of Black people lynched. There were thousands of Italians lynched that we'll never hear of. There's thousands of women who helped Black people that were lynched and raped and murdered that we'll never hear about. But we sure do hear about, you know, the 3 mixed people who went. So without those allies, we cannot move the needle because there's not enough of us to move the needle on our own. We are only 12% of the American population, right? As people who identify solely as Black. The numbers of people who identify as 2 or more races has exploded.
Right.
So in the next 20 years, 40 to 50% of the population will identify as 2 or more races. But that doesn't mean that the racism itself and colorism itself will not still exist, because I could swing a Fendi bag and hit 3 white women who are going to tell me, you know, I'm not racist, I have a Black husband, and yet they have no Black friends. They probably haven't helped any Black women at work, if not have actively tried to work against them. And just because you like Black dick doesn't mean you like Black people.
Woo!
And there's a huge
say that again.
And there's a huge distinction between the two. I mean, we're not even voting in the same interest of women, right? Like we saw, according to the polls, I think 40 something percent of women voted for Trump, and that number went up in the second election. So we're not voting the same way. We're not looking at femininity the same way. We're not looking at feminism the same way. And we're not looking at the future of women the same way. And we're not looking at race the same way.